Hello, everyone. So today I would like to talk about some aspects of mental illness that I think are not often discussed. And so the first element of this is the mistrust that one gains of your own mind due to mental illness. An example of that is, for example, in bipolar disorder, that it is very often that someone who struggles with this disorder, when they start to feel happy or when they start to have some sort of positive, effective experience, they start to question if that happiness isn't just a product of their own disease, if it isn't just the beginning of another bipolar episode. And so I believe this is a very sad aspect that is not just present in bipolar disorder, but in most mental illnesses, which is that you start questioning every experience that you have because you're afraid that it is a product of your own illness and not a product of your virtues, not a product of your actual regular life. In OCD, this can also be the case. For example, in existential OCD, we often have a fear or an intolerance of something that is abstract, of something that is unknown. Questions such as the meaning of life, questions such as what is the nature of reality. But in some moments, or after a while, you might have that anxiety completely dissipate, and you might face those questions with a mindset of curiosity. But it is also very easy to then question whether that curiosity is also just a byproduct of your OCD. And so one thing that we must be clear is that mental health diagnoses aren't necessarily a matter of qualitative descriptions, but more so of quantitative descriptions. And so what I mean by this is that, for example, in the case of OCD, if you have a certain repetitive thought about a certain idea, that only becomes or is only considered a disorder, for one, if it causes enough dysfunction in your life that it creates some amount of suffering. And then on a second level, it's not the thought itself, it's the amount of time that thought spends in your mind. So it's not really about the nature of the thought, it's about how present or not even how present that thought is in your life, but how that thought impacts you. So for example, if you pray 5 minutes a day, if you pray half an hour a day, as a society, we consider that to be okay and normal. But if you pray 8 hours a day, then that becomes and starts to be seen as something that is an obsession, an obsessive. So it's not the act itself, it's more so the quantity of that same act. And why does this matter? This matters to some extent because normally we just view mental illness as some sort of binary, discrete appearance in our lives. But we often forget that all of this is a spectrum. And so just like OCD is an augmented form of our obsessive tendencies, and everyone has some degree of obsession, everyone has some degree of neuroticism, we are looking at an augmented form of something that is part of us. And so even here, I believe that one of the problems is just considering the whole of our experience, just based on a mental illness, just based on a diagnosis, a label, and we often forget that the existence of a diagnosis, if you just look, for example, at the DSM guidelines, you will, of course, see that it is just used as something to guide treatment. It isn't supposed to be something that defines you. Because even for the same mental health condition, for example, bipolar disorder, OCD, there are enough particularities to the experience of each individual that will not be accounted for in those same guidelines. And that is just part of the game. We are using these labels as something that can be productive and that can help us in providing the treatment. But it is also very important to see that part of what we consider to be an illness is also part of normality. It is part of our humanity. And not everything is meant to be optimized. Not everything is meant to be getting rid of. And so this is a very important aspect, because as a society these days, especially because we have so much access to information, we very quickly start diagnosing everything and everyone, and we just start creating these mental disorder buffets where everyone just starts self-diagnosing and saying, oh, I'm OCD and I'm depressed and I'm anxious. But we often forget that these are just words, and these words aren't meant to just dictate your full experience. So my main message here is to tell you that mental health disorders run along a spectrum, just like a lot of things. And that a lot of times you can't really just create an artificial line and pinpoint that this is a disease or this is not a disease. In fact, it doesn't really matter if it's a disease or not. What matters is the suffering that comes from it. And so what psychiatrists try to do, at least good psychiatrists, is that they try to mitigate the suffering. They don't focus so much on whether it is a disorder or not. And this is something that is important for us to keep in mind, that we should not allow a certain label to just be our whole identity, to be who we are, and understand that the same foundations of what makes you ill is to some extent the same foundation of what makes you good at some other thing. And so what I believe is that we need to have a more grounded and open-minded view of what mental disorders are, and understand that most of the times what truly matters isn't necessarily the disease itself. What matters is whether you are suffering or not, and that is where the course of treatment is based on. For example, if you suffer from obsessive thoughts, but you don't really experience suffering from them, you're able to have a productive life, you're reasonably happy. If there's very little dysfunction, if there's very little suffering, the presence of that which is seen as a symptom of a disease stops really being indicative of a disease. So the suffering is the main aspect in a lot of these things. And so I just wanted to do this video to talk about some aspects of mental health that I don't think are really addressed. So hopefully you found this video useful, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything I just said. Thank you.